because today I wanted to focus more on your early years, your legislative career, maybe up to your election as governor. But your father was from Gilbert County and your mother was from Newton County. I was wondering, how did they meet and wind up in Bartow County?
Well, to back up on both of them just a little bit, Dad, of course, was from Gilbert County. His father had, mother, of course, married and was living there, and he was in the logging timber business. And they had, I guess, at the time Dad was probably 6 years old or so, moved to Texas and purchased a farm there and had their first crop in. And then my dad's father died, and his mother sold the farm with the crops in the field and returned back to her people in Gilbert County and stayed for a short period of time. And then an opportunity came open down at the textile mill. It was running well at that time down in Bartow County. And Atco was a community at that time that just on the outside of the city limits of Cartersville. So my dad's mother and his brother, two brothers and sister, moved to Atco, Georgia, and he very shortly thereafter even had to begin working himself to help support the family. My mother's family had worked in a similar kind of situation down in Newton County, and her dad had been in the textile operations there, and they also took a job in Bartow County in Atco, Georgia, and moved there, and later then Mom and Dad met and been married. Both of them were, I believe, 21 years old when they married there in Bartow County.
I've read that your father had to actually drop out of school when he was about 13 in order to work. Is that correct?
Well, he did. He was a self-educated, I guess you could say self-educated, because he has a tremendous mental ability, and he started working in the Goodyear mill there, and at about that age, as soon as they let him into the mill, and of course they didn't have any, I guess, beginning requirement at that time, and his earlier job was in menial ways, and moved right on up until the time that he left Goodyear. He was in supervision at a real young age there also. He was, I think, second in command of the spinning department, which was one of the major departments there in the mill. He attended night classes at Georgia Tech and extension courses and those kind of things during the course of the year, and was extremely sharp in math. Had an ability that we all envied, but he left the Goodyear security for what was a dream that he had at the time of, after the Second World War, getting into the building business of concrete products, and felt like a lot of new houses were going to be built, and they're going to need foundations, they're going to need driveways, and they're going to need concrete, and there was not a concrete supplier in our area, and so he, along with a partner, had that dream, and still, while working at Goodyear, moved into it as a sideline, and very shortly became a full-time occupation for him, and that was the beginning of the business that my brother and I both came back into after we completed our college education.
I was wondering, from your childhood years, do you have any particular memories that stand out about that time?
Well, I think probably it was during the war years, from 1942 until late 45, early 46. Well, it was during the Second World War, and I was just beginning my first grade education in 1942, and that was when it all really broke loose and came about. And we lived at that time on what was Highway 41, just outside of the village of Atco. I was born in Atco Village, and then in 1940, when I was about 4 years old, we moved to a home that Dad had struggled to make the down payment on. It was just outside the village, and struggling to maintain and keep, but there were several acres there of property that we had our own gardens and our own chickens and things like that, and was living there. But on the highway, the troops and convoys would pass by, and it was quite often, because there's a lot of movement up and down the roads and training and things like that, and passing through Georgia, and a lot of times they'd even be walking on foot. But I guess at that time, well, my vision of the future would have been an officer in the Army. I was really infatuated with what was happening then, and I was kind of a beginning artist, I guess you may say. I never advanced beyond that, but I would always like to draw airplanes, and I could envision myself being a captain in the United States Air Force. But those were, I think, some stressful times, because you didn't know whether the United States was going to be invaded or not, and they had all these air raid warnings and different exercises and things like that. It was something that was on the young people's minds very, very strongly during that period of time.
One of your old friends, Hugh Jackson, claimed that you were mischievous as a teenager, but you rarely got caught.
Hugh has been known for a long time to be the fellow that told a lot of stories about people, and made up. They sound good. No, seriously, I guess we're all mischievous in a lot of ways, and I think most of the things I was involved in, I tried to think through what the consequences were going to be, and how I could end up on the other side, and without being discovered that I was the one that was one of the perpetrators. But that's a part of growing up, and I think those kind of opportunities give you an awful lot of experiences that you're able to draw upon, and even strength, and knowing things that you shouldn't be doing, and division between right and wrong. But we're all, I guess, subjected to those kind of things in our growing up years.
I think he's the one that tells a story about setting off some dynamite to scare a civil defense coordinator. Did that story actually happen?
It actually happened, but I wasn't involved in it.
You weren't?
No, I wasn't. And fact is, I believe at that time I was probably away in the Army or something, but some of the friends of mine that we kind of ran together during that period of time was involved in an activity. I was involved with a lot of other things that were probably just as bad, but that particular event, it was one that I was absent in.
I see. I believe you have a brother and a sister. Was there much age difference between you? And
no, there's almost 2 years difference between my brother. He was almost 2 years older. I was born in February, and he was born in March, so it was about 23 months, almost 23 months difference in our age. My sister was 10 years younger. She was kind of a baby sister, I guess, but came later. But we were really a close-knit family. My brother and I guess, probably felt like brothers until he was about 8, and I was about 8, and he was about 10. I grew about as fast as he did, and I was about as big as he was from that time on through our teenage years. And so, rather than being big and little brother, we were just friends. And then we ended up in business together for a number of years after our college career was over, and business partners and a lot of ventures, and still have investments together in various places. But he was a growing up companion and friend, and still remains so.
In your high school years, did you have a part-time job or have any particular activities that you want to mention?
I always worked. From the time I was old enough to carry papers, I had a paper route. We, as I mentioned a moment ago, we had enough property so that we could raise vegetables, and we would raise and sell vegetables. We would raise and sell chickens, and that was the way that we made our own spending money. And I had jobs working at service stations on the weekends. Actually, a little later, I ran a service station for a fellow that had a second shift job. He'd run it in the early morning hours and early afternoon, and I would run it, rush in from school, and keep it open from like 3:30 in the afternoon until 7 or 8 at night, and then work with him on the weekend. I raised some calves on the halves and on the side that bull calves were not worth anything, but if you would keep them and fatten them and raise them on a bucket instead of them having to be raised on the mama, well, you could sell them later for beef or for whatever they use the scrub cattle for, and that to your pastures, because I didn't have the money to buy feed. And the very first year that I'd sowed some land down for pasture, well, it never did materialize, and so I had to go ahead and buy feed, but it learned me a lot about management. But I guess the best paying job that I had, and probably the hardest, was getting up at 3:30 every morning, meeting the milk truck and carrying the milk route, and then going on to school and then practicing football in the afternoons, and then coming back home and trying to study and get enough sleep to get back up at 3:30 the next morning, and I walk about a mile and a half to meet the truck on the route, and then we would carry the route. They would drop me back off at my home, and I'd rush in, change clothes, and grab a biscuit and rush back out and walk to school. And we lived about a mile and a half from school, I guess. Or sometimes you'd catch a ride, but usually you'd end up walking or running to get there on time. But those were all good experiences, and our family was, I guess, not considered as very affluent, because my dad did have a good income from the mill job that he had, but then we were buying our home, and we were maintaining, for the most time, 3 children there at home, and it took what we were making to make the payments and provide the automobile and the other expenses of struggling families have, but any extra money we had, we earned it. And I think, too, the experiences I had in those early jobs has been very, very valuable to me, even in the later years.
In your high school years, do you have any idea that you would ever be governor of Georgia?
During that period of time, I didn't have any idea I'd finish high school. I mean, you never look beyond what is just before you, I guess. I planned for a future, and my parents planned for an educated future. They'd always insisted that they didn't have an opportunity to go to college, but we would have that opportunity, and they would make that available for us. After I was about, I guess, 8 or 10 years old, well, it would have been nearly 10 years old, when my dad got into the concrete products business, and it was a struggle for a number of years. Started off with 1 or 2 employees and a little pull behind the truck concrete mixer, and it was rough during that period of time. Well, that was going on all during my middle and high school years, and we were, as I indicated, having to work and spend a lot of time outside of our school activities working. But they insisted that our grades be upstanding, and that we didn't just pass barely, that we did a little better than barely. And they wanted us to do a lot better than actually we did. But I wasn't the poorest student in school, but I wasn't the best student. I had a lot of activities going on too, but I managed to do, I feel like, reasonably well during that period of time in high school. I played all sports. I was a quarterback in football. My senior year was, I guess, my most active year, because I really didn't get big enough to play. Well, I wasn't big enough to play then. I weighed only 145 pounds. I was a little over 6 feet tall. I was kind of a string broomstick quarterback. But I did make the team, and I was able to play, and it was a good experience. I played basketball, and then we played a little baseball, but I never was that good. There was others a lot better than I was. By the time you get to baseball season, you're already tired of practicing it anyway. But I stayed busy all the year playing football. But I don't think I ever envisioned that I would ever be in any kind of elective office. I always envisioned at that point in my life of completing my college education, and I guess too about that time I realized that whatever you do in life and wherever you go, and I had experienced a religious conversion too during that time, that the good Lord needed to be involved, and you needed to be serving in His will. And I guess I was probably seeking too what was going to be the Lord's will in my life, and where should I be, and what should I do. After high school, of course, before that, during high school years, I was always active in the clubs. I was president of the High Y Club, the YMCA, the club that was there then, and president of key clubs, and members of others, and officers of others, and then I guess vice president of the senior class, and Joel Cowan, who was chairman of our election committee initially, and the campaign committee was the president of that senior class that I was vice chairman of, or vice president of. And we were real friends growing up at that same time. He was probably involved in that dynamiting too, I guess, but I wasn't. But anyway, after college, after high school, well, not feeling any definite direction at that time or any definite major that I felt like I needed to pursue, I attended Asbury College in Kentucky my freshman year. It was a kind of a church-related school, interdenominational, a small school, and it was a liberal arts college. And while I was there, I determined that I felt like my career ought to be in business, and they did not have a degree in business. And so I transferred from there to the University of Georgia my sophomore year and pursued a major in business administration.
I wondered why you chose Asbury.
I guess, again, back for the religious connections, we had had a number of speakers and people in our church that had been students at Asbury, had a revival once that was very inspirational, not only to me, but to a lot of people in the community from Asbury people. And a lot of people there had gone on into the ministry, and even you have people serving today in our Methodist conference in Georgia that were students at Asbury or Asbury Theological Seminary, or either went to Asbury undergraduate and transferred to Emory. So it was more or less of a, I guess, a religious attraction because of the people that had been there and the spirit that I felt from associations with them. But my dad, at that time, he was not on the board of Asbury College, but very shortly after I was a student there, he was selected and served for many years, and my brother today serves as a member of the board of Asbury College. My sister attended there for 1 year, and then she transferred to LaGrange College. But it was just a school that our family had always had a confidence in. The graduates of Asbury College had always been held in high esteem by our family, and I felt like I'd like to attend there, and did, and it was a good experience. It gave me a small school experience, and also, I think, solidified my direction that I felt like then it wasn't toward an area of full-time religious service. I felt like it wasn't toward an area of liberal arts or being a school teacher or something like that. It was more, I was more interested in business. And so I did transfer the next year to the University of Georgia.
Well, you mentioned you had a conversion experience in your youth. Would you describe that in more detail? Back when it was?
Well, I think probably if I look back in the greatest events that's ever happened in my life, you think, well, from this point, you look back and say, well, being elected governor, that was the greatest event in your life. No. Or you say marrying a preacher's daughter and having a son when there's really a miracle child because earlier we'd been told we wouldn't have any children, or couldn't possibly, or might not have any. And then after we'd been married 3 years, then we did have Joe. But or further back, you'd say, well, making that first touchdown in high school and all the cheerleaders cheering and all the esteem that you held in when you make the team and score a touchdown was a big experience. But probably the most lasting and the most traumatic experience in my whole life goes back to when I was at an early age, really, accepting Jesus Christ as my personal Savior. And that has remained constant. At times, I'm like all other individuals. You stray some from the path, but then you know what you're supposed to be doing, you know where you're supposed to be, and that attraction has always brought me back. And it has given me a lot of the wisdom, the strength, and I think the confidence to be willing to undertake whatever the obligation or the opportunity might be before me. And with confidence, too, that this is what the good Lord desires for me to try to attempt to do. And then, too, that has been my direction, I guess, from an early age, that I find a place where I can serve. I did not feel that I indicated the call for a full-time ministry or be a foreign missionary or full-fit duties or those kind of things. But I did feel a call to serve as a Christian person in business, in government, or whatever even the future might hold for me beyond. I intend to do that. But that has been a real, I guess, a governing authority in my life since my early acceptance. And then at the times that I have indicated I have strayed during my life and and had an opportunity to recommit again to those principles and the obligation I felt like that I undertook initially when I accepted that obligation.
I'm sure your parents exerted quite an influence upon you, and other religious leaders must have also. Were there any other people that you might mention as being influential?
Well, I'd have to say my parents, number one. If there's ever been a dedicated, consecrated, godly mother and father, I think I had those two people. I know everybody feels like their parents were the only two like them in the world, but we were taught from as early as I can remember is that when Sunday comes, you're in church. And they didn't just send us, they carried us. And then they also, by example, made us as their children aware that you have obligations to uphold as far as your commitment of your time, your commitment of your dollars. They believed in tithing, and we were, as I indicated earlier, selling those vegetables and working with those menial jobs. We tithed the funds that we would derive from those opportunities, as they did, even when we were struggling. And I know many times when it was probably easier to take that 10% and apply it to something that we needed in the family, that it went to church, it went to church work. And then through example again of my father, during those struggling years in business, I saw him build a church. He was treasurer of that church and chairman of the building committee, I think, at the time, or whatever. But for instance, when the benches were ordered, the money was not there to pay for them, he paid for them. When the concrete was sent, they never was charged. And when the lumber was ordered and the funds were gathered to pay for it, he matched the dollars. When the brick was bought, the women of the church were going to buy the brick, and so he made an obligation to them. Well, if they could raise enough money to pay for so many thousand brick, well, then he would buy so many thousand. Well, then he was trapped into paying for the brick. But it was the kind of person that he was. During that same period of time, he was supporting and paying for students at another attraction, I guess, to Asbury College, that were going to be working full-time ministry, mission field, or full-time church work. He would contribute to their education. And one of the most giving people, and mother just as bad. If anyone died in the community that she had heard of, whether she knew him personally or not, she'd be the first one there with a cake or something for that family for the dinner the next day and that kind of thing. I mean, she's always reaching out to assist to someone else's needs. I'll never forget during growing up time, she was a pianist. And the funeral home there in Cartersville, anytime they'd have someone that they couldn't get anybody in their home churches or to play, well, they'd always call, and mother would go play, and we was in all kind of country churches all around the whole area up there playing for funerals. And I was, at an early age, would be placed on the front bench waiting for mother to get through playing for that funeral and watching the proceedings, but also knowing that somebody was in need and that she was administering to that need. But I think probably my parents would probably, I could say, had the most profound spiritual impact on my life. And even today, Dad and Mom still involved as much so as they're in their 70s. They're both 76 now. But they both carry on full-time duties and assisting somebody doing something else or giving of their funds. But it's been returned to us all as a family. We've been blessed. And my parents have been blessed. We're not the most wealthy people in the world, but then I don't know of any needs that we're having. And the good Lord supplied those needs in abundance. And I've been very, very blessed.
When I visited the University of Georgia back in the late 50s, it struck me as a rather wild party school. I had been to Young Harris College at the time. And I wonder, what was your impression of the university?
Probably the same impression. It was the biggest school that I'd ever been associated with or even around. And that was, I think, probably the scary thing about transferring to the University of Georgia. I considered several other smaller schools, but then I couldn't get the degrees that I was seeking at the other schools I was looking at the time. And then one of my high school buddies was there, one of the people that you referred to a moment ago that was always involved in some of the mischievous things that was going on. And actually, he was involved in the dynamiting that you're talking about. Sonny Jackson. Sonny was my roommate my sophomore year when I went to the University of Georgia, and I guess that might have been one of the attractions that I had friends there. There were other Carswell people there that I knew that we were friends with that probably attracted me to go there. But yes, it was what you might say a semi-wild school at the time because there were activities going on. That was back during the time that we were having the burnings of the governor of Georgia in effigy at that time. Governor Griffin was the governor, and we were having the panty raids and the marches and a lot of hooplas and going-ons and things like that. That kept a lot of interest going on around the campus. But we were, or at least I might say I was involved as much as time would allow, and I didn't ever get caught stepping out of bounds. My brother did, but and I was there with him. They just didn't get me. But I don't think I was any model student by any means, but that was one of the periods of times in my life that I guess I strayed beyond the parameters that I had accepted earlier, and that later on I had to be forgiven for and back up and do what I knew was right.
That's easy to do during your college years.
Well, it is. I mean, temptations are great, and peer pressure is great. But I never did do anything illegal or wrong that I could have been prosecuted for. But then, again, we were pretty mischievous during that time.
Many of Georgia's governors have attended the university. In fact, you might say that the University of Georgia is a training ground for governors. Do you think your experiences there enhanced your political career?
I feel it probably did because of those people that we were having fun with and getting to know. They were all predominantly Georgia residents that went back into areas all across the state. My fraternity association certainly brought a bond and friendship that extended throughout the state that later on when I became a statewide candidate, a lot of those folks came forward and became involved and supporters of Joe Frank Harris. But I think there's probably a nucleus there as far as a statewide campaign is concerned that might not be available at many of the other schools that would remain in Georgia as predominantly as at that time particularly I think the students were doing.
Were you involved in a lot of campus activities while you were a student?
Well, I guess my main involvement at that time was I was there for only 3 years, not quite 3 years. Actually, I finished up a quarter early. I got out in March instead of June in the year that I should have been graduating. My fraternity affiliations and through it and the intramural sports there and those kind of things, I never did seek an inter-campus office or that kind of a position while I was in school, but competition was pretty great, and I was again struggling trying to get out as quickly as I could and get on into whatever the next step in my life might have been, and that was one of the reasons I was taking extra hours, a lot of quarters I was there, so that I not only could take some of the subjects that I wanted to take and courses that I wanted to take. I took courses in most of the schools that were there, from forestry schools to ag and even a course in home economics, not a home economics course as such, but it was one in textiles and apparel that I was majoring in marketing, and I felt like that might be something I could use later. And I ended up with more hours than I actually needed for graduation because I would see a course that I would want to take. One that helped me very much, it was in the forestry school, I believe ag school, it was surveying. And I used that an awful lot after. I knew I was going to be in business or building and construction and everything else, but the preliminary knowledge I gained there with using an instrument in surveying and shooting up grades and levels and laying off buildings, things like that, it was very valuable to me later. But as organized campus activities, I guess basically my fraternity and the church activities I was involved in. I remember back in that period of time, at the time that I became 18 years of age, or I should have become 18, I was subject to, I believe, an 8-year military obligation, either in reserve or standby, or you had a total time, 2 years active duty and 6 years in reserve, or they didn't have a 6-month program at that time. But at that time, you could join the National Guard or Reserve and be exempted from active military service as long as you stayed an active member of the reserve. And of course, that was very shortly after the Korean War, and the draft was still in effect, and people were being drafted. Not as much so, but there was still the threat of the draft. So at the age of 17, my parents had to sign. All of us that was a member of that dynamite crew that you mentioned a moment ago joined the Air National Guard. And we all went down to Dobbins in Marietta and started our reserve time. Well, I started my military obligation at 17 years old, so actually I could have stayed in it and stayed active and been eligible for retirement when I was 37. But I stayed in it until I decided I was going to Kentucky to school. So they transferred me then to a standby air reserve from the Air National Guard. That again made me eligible for the draft. So as long as you're a full-time student, you wouldn't be drafted. And that gave me the deferment until I completed my college work. Well, about the time that I was due to be getting out of college, well, it was cranking up again. Well, they may be going to draft again. So I didn't want to spend 2 full years in service. And so I volunteered for 6 months active duty training in the infantry or in the Army. And so I finished my college in, I believe, like March the 10th or 12th, and then left like March the 22nd or in that time frame in 1958 for 6 months active duty training. Went to Fort Jackson for the first phase of it. They had assured me that I could come back to the University of Georgia, march down the aisle and receive my degree on the day that I was scheduled to receive it if I'd go ahead and join. Well, as promises always are, no one ever remembered that, and I was determined that I had spent the almost 4 years pursuing that degree, that I was going to be there. In the meantime, they transferred me to Fort Knox, Kentucky. I was to report at Fort Knox on the Monday or the Sunday or the weekend prior to receiving my degree, like on a Tuesday or Wednesday. If you've ever been in a crisis, that was a crisis, to go reporting to a new assignment and asking for a pass to go back home or go back to your state immediately. But I did, and I was able to prevail, and it's another long story of how I was able to do that, but I came back to the University of Georgia and got my degree and walked down the aisle with all the rest of my classmates, and then finished up my active duty time in September of that year. Returned back to Georgia and went into the active concrete products business then with my brother and my dad, who was already there at the time. But brother just completed his military duty of that summer, and so we all started out kind of together at that time. I did serve after that time for 5.5 years active reserve in the Army, and after that period of time was up, well, I did have an honorable discharge.
So you entered businesses actually with your father and your brother. That's the Harris Cement Products?
Harris Cement Products Incorporated. My father had incorporated the business earlier, and at that time I did not own any stock. My brother had been included in the incorporation with a few minor shares as an incorporator when it was incorporated, because he was old enough for him to be incorporated. I later had to buy into the business and earn my shares of it. The business was later pretty well a third, and a third as far as the ownership of it. We moved from our coming back and being involved in it at that time in 1958, I guess in September 1958. We had, I guess, less than probably 12 to 15 employees at that time. But we moved from just a small operation in Cartersville to a multi-plant operation in Bartow and Cobb counties, ready-mix concrete products and concrete blocks and precast concrete. And we also, in the early years, did some subcontracting and constructing of buildings. I even did that myself, and drawing of the plans and those kind of things. It was really a long shot from what I've been trained to do in college. But again, I think some very valuable experiences for me. But we operated the business until, I guess, 1981, when it was sold to Allied Concrete Products. And the concrete products part of it was sold to them, and the corporation was dissolved. At that time, I might say too, we were operating, I guess, 60 to 70 trucks and 80 to 100 employees, and it was going
You did quite well.
it was a good business, a good experience, and it was not like a normal family operation where you have all the kind of problems. I served as the controller or secretary and treasurer of the company, and ended up starting out with the bookkeeping and all of the purchasing, or at least the paying of the bills and the sending of the statements and the invoices and those kind of things were kind of in the category that I supervised and looked after. And then along with that earlier, I supervised the buildings that we leased, and also a lot of subcontract work, concrete construction, pouring and putting floors, installing septic systems and those kind of things, and anything else. And we had backhoe equipment and digging equipment and small tractors and things like that, anything in the small earth moving, preparing sites and things like that. Well, if you can make a dollar, we try. And then my brother was more in the day-to-day management of the business and the hiring and firing of the employees and the delivery of the orders after they were taken and the production end of it, which was a natural for him. And then, of course, Dad was for many years available and as the final say in the directions going in, what we did, and to deliver service and to be sure that it was all there, the quality was there. And then he actually became, in his early 60s, I guess, he started phasing out more of his day-to-day activities and was there more of a, I guess, of an advisor and to fill in wherever he's needed than an active participant.
How did you meet your wife?
Well, she was the daughter of our minister at the Faith United Methodist Church, the church that actually was my home church. I started out in my earlier years attending the Atco Union Church. The Methodists met on one Sunday. We were on the Methodist circuit from the North Cartersville circuit there, and we'd have the Methodist preacher there on one Sunday. The Baptist minister would serve the next Sunday, and I guess I'm a hybrid. I'm part Baptist and part Methodist. I just didn't get immersed. I was only sprinkled and joined the Methodist church when I was converted during my earlier years. And my parents were Methodists. My dad came out of the Baptist church, and my mom did too during their early years, and they had joined the Baptist, so it was natural for us to follow them. But later, I guess in my early teens, well then the fund raise was on, and the drive was made to have our separate churches, so we'd have our full-time Methodist preacher, and also the Baptists could have their preacher full-time. And so the Methodists moved out and built the church that I referred to a moment ago that my family and my dad participated in so much. And it was named Faith United Methodist Church. Reverend Ernest Carlock, who was assigned to our church there, and of course Elizabeth, my wife's father, was our pastor. Elizabeth, that summer that I met her and we became serious, was right after they had moved there in June, and Elizabeth was in Texas working for one of the oil companies there, living with her sister that lived in Houston as an intern or working there that summer. She came back on a Sunday just before her college started down at LaGrange College, and I had known of the family as she was growing up because being in the Methodist Church, you were familiar with a lot of the other congregations and other pastors, and actually they had served during the time that Elizabeth was born. They were serving a charge in Bartow County that I was not familiar with at the time, didn't know it. But in 1940, she was born actually in Whitfield County, but they were living and serving a charge in Bartow County at the time. But she was visiting her parents on that weekend, and I, of course, was an eligible young bachelor at the time, and spotted a prospect. And from that day until we were married in the following June, well, the attraction was very strong, and it's still tremendously strong. Elizabeth was a senior at LaGrange College, and we dated all during that year, and decided later in the year that we would get married. We was married on June 25th in 1961.
She seems to be quite a political asset. Did she encourage you to get into politics?
Actually, no. Getting into politics came kind of as an afterthought, I guess, with a lot of people in Cartersville. I was 25 when I married, and then it was 3 years later before our son was born, and our son was 2 months old, I guess, when I was approached to seek a legislative seat. Well, I had been so busy in helping to get started in the business, and we'd just built a new home and moved into it in February, and actually Joe came a couple of months earlier than he was supposed to have come, and he was a little bit of a problem child during his first year as far as he had problems being able to realize that he was now in the world and he didn't have to cry every night, and I'd have to get up and help Elizabeth get the bottles, and sometimes she would be unable to wake me because we'd be starting to work early in the morning at that time and working late at night, and a lot of pressure. It was mostly an opportune time, I guess, for anybody decided you want to be involved in politics. Well, normally in Bartow County, the history had been we had 2 representatives in our county. It was a county of 27,000 population at the time. Our history had been 2 terms and out. 4 years was the most anyone had ever served in modern times in Georgia. In Bartow County. And the person that I was asked to oppose had only served 1 term. He'd been here before that was the 2nd year. Very popular and a strong candidate. And he had represented more, I guess, of things at the time that the people in Bartow County couldn't identify with and maybe didn't associate with, and they felt like, well, he was out of tune with what they needed, and they were looking for someone to represent them in a new face. Well, I think actually several people had been pursued, and for various reasons that they had decided, well, maybe I didn't have any more sense than to try it, and having trouble talking anybody else into it, so they approached me. And when they did, it was a group of my close friends from Sonny Jackson I mentioned earlier, and the Gene Tillers, and the Joel Cowan group, and I debated about it and told them, I said, I never thought about it. I didn't know what it paid, if it paid anything. I didn't know how many days would be required. I didn't know what the obligations would be. I had been involved in only 1 campaign, and that was 2 years prior. That was Carl Sanders when he ran for governor, just in a minor way of helping put up a few posters and at least admitting, well, I was a supporter of Carl Sanders more than actually knowing how to do what needed to be done. Judge Ingram in Cartersville was his campaign manager, which was a friend of my dad's and ours, and it was natural for all of us to support Carl, and so we followed that direction. My response when I was approached was that I'd be glad to pray about it, and if I felt that that was what the good Lord was leading me to do, then I would consider it. Well, 2 or 3 days later, the group, or a couple of representatives of the group, brought out to the office of the Senate products plant and presented me with a check made out to the Bartow County Democratic Party for the amount you had to qualify then with a local party, and said the balance of the amount that they'd raised from, I believe, 40 people that had contributed anything from $10 up to, I think, most was $100, but they had about a total of about $400. The balance of it was in the bank, and they gave me a checkbook and said, we're ready for you to go qualify. Well, I did not at that time feel like that the good Lord had closed the door and I shouldn't do it. And so I went on over to pay the qualifying fee. And you had to pay it to the secretary of the county party, which was an attorney by the name of Percy Bray. And Percy immediately, we had, as indicated, we had 2 representatives. He immediately made the suggestion, well, the representative that was an incumbent, Bill Green, at the time, said, maybe you want to run against Bill Green, not Jake Cullins, because Jake hadn't served but 1 term. I mean, he's just serving his first 2 years. And I explained to him, my opponent is going to be Jake Cullins. That's the position I want to qualify for. And he tried to prevail on me to let me hold the check for a day or 2, and you think about it a little longer, and if that's what you want to do, well, let me know, and then I'll go ahead and deposit the check, and we'll start the proceedings, and which he proceeded to do. And I told him then, I said, well, this is my decision, it's what I want to do, and I'm now giving you a check to qualify. So I left there and I went on down to the newspaper, the Tribune News. A fellow by the name of Milton Fleetwood had operated for years, it was a family operation, and he was pretty wise in his advice that he would give people. And his immediate response was, well, maybe you ought to think about this a few days. You're a good young feller, and you don't want to start out losing your first campaign if you're interested in politics. And I won't say anything about it or put it in the paper until you tell me a few days from now if that's what you really want to do. Kind of. Well, I was wondering, well, is this really the right thing? You know, 2 out of 2 has said, think about it, you better not do it. But I felt so strongly that in the way it came about, and that there had been a door open, that I shouldn't let that discourage me. So I told him, I said, no, my mind has been made up. This is what I'm going to do. Win, lose, or draw. I mean, I'm a candidate, so go ahead and put it in paper. Well, he did a very small mention the next day. We had a daily paper. And we started from that point, going from house to house, door to door. I didn't know how to do it, and people would tell you, well, you've got to go see old Mr. So-and-so. He's the one that carries this precinct. If you don't see him, he's not supporting you. Well, you're not going to carry that precinct. But we carried, I think at the time, Bartow County had 14 or 15 precincts, and we carried like 12 out of the 14. Or I only lost 2 precincts, I believe, in that election. And there's a whole whole story of why I lost those 2 precincts, probably. But I was elected overwhelmingly to the position and served in the House for 18 years. I was elected 9 times. Only had an opponent after my initial race twice. After I'd been in the House 6 years, my old high school principal, a fellow by the name of John I. Parker, qualified and ran against me. He was, I think, imposed upon to run because the qualifying date, as I recall, for the Republican Party was 1 week later than the Democrat. I didn't have Democratic opposition, and the rule of thumb had been 4 years and out, and I was serving then my 6th year. And some of the people felt like, well, I at least ought to have some opposition, but they wasn't going to beat me, and talked him into running as a Republican. So I had a Republican opponent when I'd been here 6 years. Then, after I had served another 4 years, I had been impressed upon by a number of people in the 7th District to entertain a race for Congress, again through prayer and through both Elizabeth and my prayers. We didn't feel like that was the thing that I should do, but I wasn't sure what my future should be in politics. I mean, should I stay in the House for many years, or should I even attempt to stay for another term, or should I get out and go and run my business and devote my full time to my own business? But we felt just as strongly, I guess, at that time that we did, or as we did some 8 years later, that it was very clear that the good Lord wanted us to stay in Georgia, stay in the House of Representatives, and not knowing at that time why, but I felt like that I ought to go ahead and qualify and run again. Well, we did, and I did not know at the time that I was going to have opposition, and didn't know until a week or so later, during the qualifying period. I was shaving one morning and listening to the local news, and I heard on the local news that a young man by the name of Jeff Davis was on the way to Atlanta to qualify against incumbent Representative Joe Frank Harris for the House seat that I occupied. We had been through 2 or 3 reapportionments at the time, and I hadn't really been challenged in the district as it existed at that time in Dawson County, Pickens County, and Bartow and Cherokee County. And so that was my first real challenge in those counties. And really, those people had not known me that long, so I didn't know what the outcome was going to be, but I felt very strongly that that was what I needed to do, and which we worked very hard and covered those counties. And Elizabeth was, again, a real asset to my campaign, a real help, as she had been during all the campaigns that we'd had. And I guess we received probably 2/3 of the vote or more during that time, or in that range, and was elected again. In December of that year, after being elected and in the primary, I guess, in September, and then the election in November. The speaker called and told me that because of the seniority that I had, I'd been in the House for 10 years, been on the Appropriations Committee for quite some time, was secretary of that committee, that I was probably eligible to be a committee chairman in another committee, but not appropriation, because Sloppy Floyd was chairman, and he was Mr. Appropriation, and the person that everybody had, I guess, when appropriations were mentioned, I always thought about Sloppy Floyd, and I never felt that I would ever have an opportunity to take his place, but I was interested in the appropriation process, the work I'd done there, and I told the Speaker, I said, Mr. Speaker, I had rather stay in the position I hold on appropriations than to move from there and be a chairman of one of the other committees. And he'd asked me to move up to be vice chairman that year, and which I'd a lot rather at that time been vice chairman than been a chairman of another committee. And I remained there. Well, not knowing a few weeks later that, of course, Sloppy Floyd had a heart attack. He passed away and died. And I never forget the Speaker on that morning. We were supposed to be meeting with Governor Busby that had just been elected and was about to take office in January to discuss the revenue estimate. And our feelings about his figure, his number. I had served with Governor Busby, and we had been on the conference committee of the budget during the years that he was in the House after Sloppy had passed on, and the Speaker was elected Speaker, and I took the Speaker's place on the conference committee, and then the conference committee was George Busby, Sloppy Floyd, and myself. But after we had met here that morning, we received word that Sloppy had passed away that night, and we went ahead and had the meeting. And not much of a meeting because everyone was concerned about, grieved about the passing of Sloppy, our friend. The Speaker called me to come across in his office. We were meeting across the street in one of the government buildings here in the Capitol Complex. I returned to the office with him, and I never forget, he said, you're a fine young representative, and said, you're doing an outstanding job, doing a good job. And the Speaker is not the kind of person that compliments you a lot of times, and I mean, you seek his approval by him not getting on to you or saying that you should have done it. Yes. And so I felt honored that he would compliment me, but I didn't know what was going to come next. But as I recall the conversation, he said that I'm not sure that you're tough enough to be Speaker, to be a chairman of the Appropriations Committee, because that takes a pretty tough person. I mean, it's a big job. I know you can handle a job, but then you're too good a fellow. You're too mild-mannered, I guess he might have said at the time, but that was what he was referring to. And he said, to be chairman of that committee, you got to be a tough SOB. And he didn't exactly say SOB. And my response to him was that, Mr. Speaker, I feel like I know the job, and I feel like that I can do the job, and I feel like I can do the job like Joe Frank Harris needs to do the job, and not like someone else might have done it, or you might feel like it needs to be done. But that's your decision. If you decide if you want me to do the job, I'll assure you that you'll never be sad that was or ashamed that you made that decision. And he indicated to me then that that was going to be his decision, but it would not be announced until after the funeral was held, and which it was not. And then when he announced it, I know he probably had as many phone calls as others. Joe Frank who? I mean, really I had taken an active part in the old Green Door group, and actually had met back a year before that with then Governor Busby and Speaker Murphy and Sloppy Floyd, and discussing the budget early in the morning before the General Assembly would go into session, and when people didn't know anybody was even concerned about the budget except for the governor. Back then, when I first came to the General Assembly, or at that time, the governor pretty well sent his budget to the General Assembly. It was all passed in just a few minutes. I mean, there was very little debate, and it was more or less a routine procedure. And after the election of Governor Maddox, and the House, I guess, claimed their independence, well then the debate for the budget became a lot more sensitive and a lot more involved, and people became more intelligent about it. I was one of those that tried to become more intelligent about it. But I felt in my own heart that even if I hadn't been known as one of the so-called leadership of the House at the time, and the Speaker had anointed me as the chairman, that I was going to do the job, and he was going to be proud, and I feel like that I did, and I feel like he was.
In the course of your years in the legislature, you served under three different speakers. You knew George T. Smith, George L. Smith, and Tom Murphy. How would you compare their style of leadership?
Well, I think at the time that they have served, each one of them brought something a little unique, and probably their style was probably adequate for that moment in our history. George T. Smith, of course, I came during the middle of Sanders' term. He had been Speaker for 2 years, and I came in the second part of his tenure as Speaker. He was a fair person to me, and he became a friend of mine. And at that time, if you were a new member of the House, you really had to be seen and not heard. Most of the House members were all a lot older. There was only one other member a few months younger than I was at the time that I was elected to the House, and I was 28. Most of them were all older, and some much, much, much older than the average age, I guess, now. At that time, every county had a representative because we hadn't had reapportionment, and we had 205 members in the House, and so you just filled a seat mainly at that time. But George T. became a friend and was available when we called on him to visit in Bartow County at times, and I remember wearing a jacket that had inscribed and written, sewn in the back of that jacket, George T. for me and for Lieutenant Governor, when we tried to help encourage him to run for Lieutenant Governor that next term, which he was elected Lieutenant Governor and moved on. George L. Smith was very skilled, very astute, very knowledgeable, and a very domineering speaker. If you were not a member of the George L. Smith team, well then you had to play the game till you became a member of that team. And I was understanding how politics worked during his tenure. I think it's very educational to me. I never did consider myself as being a full-fledged member of his team because I was a little bit too much of a maverick, I guess, during those years. And I voted like Joe Frank Harris wanted to vote, and like I thought my constituents wanted me to vote. And I don't think I can say a single time, though, that he ever called on me or said that I need you or you better vote this way or that way. I think I was so far down the list, so he never noticed me. But I appreciate him for that because I would have probably cut a gap in our relationship if I had been opposite something he wanted. I don't know of any case where that might have been the problem either, but still. And most times speakers don't. You interpret, you feel what they would like to see you do when you're on their team and working with them, trying to help, more so than they come to you and say, vote this way or that way. Then Speaker Murphy came next, and out of those three, I think I would have to rate him 3-2-1 because I served more years with Speaker Murphy. He gave me the opportunity that I had to be the chairman. He believed in me, and I think he's probably one of the most knowledgeable people in state government outside of course, I feel that I've attained a little knowledge during the period of time that I've served too, and experience that I've had. But I think in the House today, he's one of the most knowledgeable people there. I think he's been very effective in his leadership of the House and the order that he's established. And I don't feel that, even in my own personal experience, I never had the experience that the Speaker came to me and ever requested me to go any direction that I might not have been headed anyway. But then the committee chairmen all meet together, and I think you pretty well understand the direction that you're going into as a body or as a body of leaders, and sometimes it may not be exactly what you'd like to see happen, but then when you're a member of a team, you've got to play with that team. And I think if the team's going to be effective, then you've got to be a part of it. And so I was a member of that team.